Hello to the UK column listeners. I'm delighted to be back. And what's the subject today? The subject is Gutsy women. And I've got a lady with me who I haven't known for very long, but we started a little bit of communication over her good efforts, and you'll hear about those in a minute. So I'm going to welcome to the UK column a lady called Rosie. Hello, Rosie, and thank you very much for joining me.
Yes, hello, and thank you for having me here.
It's a pleasure. Now, you have been active in creating an organisation. I'll name the organisation. It's the White Rose UK.
Mm-hmm.
And I first became aware of this some time ago. And as we'll see in the conversation, I was very interested at what you were doing because of the origins of the White Rose. So, Rosie, tell us a little bit, if you will, just a little bit of background to yourself, as much as you're happy to share, and tell us what the White Rose is about.
Sure. So, well, it all started back in 2020. We all know what was then when restrictions, mask wearing, and the lockdowns and all that started. It was me and a few others in my family and who were close to me. We just realised things aren't going, they're just going wrong. And it reminded me strongly of the time during World War II, Germany. And as a teenager, which was quite a while ago, I watched a film from the original White Rose, so Weiße Rose, they're called in German, and I felt very inspired at that time. And I was very touched from what they did, but I never thought I would ever come to into a situation which would be similar to theirs, although it may look very different from the outside. So back in 2020, I mean, things are very relaxed now, but back then it seemed quite scary how Boris Johnson introduced the lockdown, and then first promise it's going to be 3 weeks. After the 3 weeks were over, it just got extended and extended further and further. There were restrictions coming up which nobody would have dreamt of that could be ever implemented into this society, like having to wear a mask to go to the shop and all these things. And then, of course, quite early, they started promoting the vaccine, which was then still in development. And it just rang a lot of alarm bells. And that's when I started to, I remembered the White Rose of Germany, and I remembered how they resisted in a peaceful, passive way. So they wrote leaflets and they distributed the leaflets without giving away any names, without showing who they were. And I thought, we have to do something similar. So I wrote a leaflet. We didn't have a website or anything at that time. And I went to one of the very early protests in London, and me and a few others, we distributed this leaflet. And it was only a few months later where we started with the website, and then we got a lot of support. A lot of people joined us and said, oh, it's so good to know that you exist. It's so good, because we thought we were the only ones, and we thought, there's so much craziness, and people were afraid, and they just really were glad to come across a group like us, and then it just grew from then on, and people subscribed to our newsletters, and we always kept people informed. We attended various protests in London, and then after a few years, things just calmed down and restrictions eased or went away. But when we thought, okay, it's going to be over when this COVID hype is over, but then just all of us together, we just discovered more and more things, and people kept sending in information of more things, what connected to this COVID and to the agenda. And then the picture just grew, was bigger. And then we just realized that we can't stop. We can't stop. We have to continue. There's so much connected with this COVID thing. There's so much what belongs to the same agenda. So that's why we're still continuing our work, basically. Yeah.
Rosie, thank you very much for that. This is extraordinary for me because lockdown for you obviously made a huge impression, and obviously there are a lot of people now who are prepared to say, my goodness, looking back, I could see in some ways people looking back seem to feel more strongly about lockdown than they did at the time they were experiencing it. And I think I understand a little bit of how that works, but clearly for you and other people around you, the lockdown made a significant impact on them. It was very, these are just my words for it, but it was very oppressive very quickly. Mm-hmm. And then we started to see strange behavior in other people around us, people who normally we might consider friends, or they could be family members. They suddenly started to act differently during the lockdown period. And that was a big shock to me. There was some members of my wider family that were clearly very frightened, not only of what was happening in lockdown, but they were frightened as to what the police might do if they broke some of the lockdown guidance, like socializing or having Sunday lunch together. So that was the background, and that started you thinking about the resistance back in Nazi Germany. Mm-hmm. And when our conversation started, when I started speaking to you, which was only a couple of weeks ago, I immediately said, my goodness, this is incredible, because back in 2008, it was actually February in 2008, when the UK column was printing a written newspaper, which we were in that time. We had nearly a full-page article, which was the main headline on the page was the UK column, Battlefield Analysis, explaining how the UK is being destroyed from within. And then the picture was a black and white picture of the three key young German people who were involved with the White Rose resistance movement. And our warning was prompted by the fact that we felt that there was a new fascist system creating itself through the European Union. And I went looking on the internet, and I was looking about oppression, really. And I remember that led me into some YouTube clips. And the next minute, I also found the film about the White Rose resistance group. Mm-hmm. And just to help the audience out a little bit, if I may, I'll just read a little bit of what we wrote. You've also got information up on your website, which is recognising these, I'm going to call them youngsters, because they were very young. They were in their early 20s, if I remember correctly. It said, we said at the time, the White Rose began distributing anti-government leaflets in mid-1942. Now, remember, this was happening in Nazi Germany. The main authors were Hans Scholl, Alex Schmorell, and George Wittenstein. They wrote 4 leaflets and distributed about 100 copies of them. Of the 100, 35 fell into the hands of the Gestapo. At about this time, Sophie Scholl joined the group. It is known that Hans Scholl coined the expression leaflets of the White Rose, but the origin of the expression is unclear. The leaflets protested against the brutality and evil of the government and against the extermination of the Jews, which was become more known to more people at the time. So the student revolt, which is also there with this, and people involved were Hans Scholl, who, yes, was 25, He was a medical student, and his sister Sophie, 21. And then there was another young guy who was actually in the German army at the time. But when they put these leaflets out, people were being executed, and a figure that I found on information, the German White Rose website, was that over 5,000 people were executed under the Nazi regime for making trivial offences, such as making jokes about Hitler or listening to radio broadcasts from Britain. So, Rosie, just quite incredible that both of us, we came in at a slightly different angle, but what we picked up on was that there was an oppressive regime installing itself in UK, and we both found the bravery of those young German people who stood up against their own government.
Yes. And I remember that I named the first leaflet what I wrote, before I even knew we were going to have a website or any group or whatever. I remember I named the first newsletter Continuation of the White Rose, because they had a friend who wasn't executed, and she, I think, as far as I remember, she carried on writing in the same spirit as they did. And so I recited her when she said, the White Rose has to continue. This is a continuation of the White Rose. And back in 2020, although it's a completely different setting, but when I reread, I have to say, their leaflets from the 40s, I noticed the core of their whole resistance was the same. They were resisting some evil power. They named it evil power, and they wanted to wake people up, and they said it in these words. They wrote it in these words, and that's exactly what we wanted to do. We wanted to wake people up, because during COVID, people were sleepwalking into some oral, how do you call it, dystopia, and it seemed like the regime what was ruling in England, and not just England, also worldwide, was just would just go on and do more rules, and we didn't know where this was going to end, and it looked scary at that time. So kind of it was comparable. I know there were people who didn't understand our comparison. They would say, "Oh, how could you be so? That's cruel to compare it with the White Rose of Germany. That was a completely different situation." But I also wrote somewhere in another leaflet or in somewhere, I remember saying that at that time, when the White Rose in Germany, when they were distributing their leaflets, nobody would approve of what they were doing. They would, apart from their friends and those who were thinking the same way, but a lot of people would say, "Why would you do such a thing? That's not good. But you're going against the regime." And they weren't popular at that time. They only became heroes after their death. So yeah.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And if you'll allow me, I'll just read what you have posted on your website, the White Rose UK. And this is a brief history of Visa Rose, if I've pronounced that properly in German. And you say here, during World War II, a German underground movement called the White Rose distributed leaflets calling on people to resist the Nazi regime. One of their leaflets mentioned that every single human is entitled to a government that guarantees the freedom of every single person and the well-being of the community. Every human should be able to reach their natural goal, their earthly joy, autonomously and by their own accord. The White Rose spoke to people's conscience and urged them to wake up from their dangerous lethargy. In their fourth leaflet, the members of the White Rose wrote, "We won't be silenced. We are your bad conscience. The White Rose won't leave you in peace." And as you said, the the main members of the group were executed, and that included Sophie Scholl and her brother Hans Scholl and their friend Christoph Probst as well. And yes, it is amazing that here we are in 2024, and both you and I see the relevance in the immense bravery of the young German people during that very dark period in Germany.
Yes. And at that time, brutality was very visible, but it was not necessarily more than nowadays. In these days, the brutality is here too, but it's not visible. So if we believe that many people are being injured by the so-called COVID vaccine, we have the same brutality. We have, this bioweapon, basically killing people, injuring people, and making them disabled for life and things like that. And it's not just in one country; it's global. So there is a very big brutality, but it's covered. It's more masked up, we could say. It's not as obvious as it was during Nazi times.
Yes, this is a very good point, that the brutality is very much there. I mean, we could say that we could look at the war-torn areas of the world, so that we could look at Ukraine at the moment, or what's happening in Israel and Gaza, and or Yemen, and we have wars where people are being killed and maimed, and that's happening overtly. But also we've got oppression of people, which is coming in very slowly, to the extent that many people, they sort of sense something is wrong, but they don't actually see it as an attack on them. Mm-hmm. And I'll just add that when we wrote that article in UK Column back in 2008, Mike and myself had been to Bournemouth to meet up with some people who were very worried about what was starting to happen with removal of liberties in UK, principally as a result of law coming in from the European Union. But while we were there, we had the opportunity to speak to a very elderly German lady. She'd lived through the war. She'd been bombed out of her home twice. In Hamburg was one of those. I can't remember what the other German city was. But at the end of the war, she formed a relationship with an English soldier who was based in Germany, and ultimately she came back to England with him and made her life here in England. But she talked about the fact that when the Nazi regime came in, she described how it was very slow. Things came in slowly. So local officials got more power, and then they would get more power, and then they got uniforms to go with that power. And then she said, then it got to the point where more and more of these local officials could come into your home for a number of reasons. And she reinforced it by saying that the oppressive regime installed itself like the drip, drip, drip of an anesthetic. And then she said, and it's happening here in this country, and I'm so anxious because people can't see it. And that was a narrative that really stuck with me, because that lady had been through a lot, and she'd seen terrible suffering and devastation inside Germany. And here she was, or at that time, there she was as a German lady, warning us that the same things were happening in UK. But so many people still do not seem to see what's happening.
Yeah. And did you say that was back in 2008?
Yes, it was.
So I think in 2020, it became even more scary, even more obvious that we are, step by step being led in some kind of almost communist regime, and that, yeah, as she said, drip by drip. That's what we were afraid of. That's what we noticed. That's why we felt it was so urgent to try to wake people up, because there was one restriction coming after the other, and it was when you just looked at it from a distance and not just took it for like, oh, this is just coincidence. This is just how they're doing it because they want the best. When you took a step back and looked at it from a distance, you could see there's a massive plan behind it, and that we were slowly moving into a very dystopian society. And that's why I think not just the White Rose, also many other groups then started and did a great pushback, luckily. And we were able to prevent then the COVID vaccine passport, for example. But of course, those who are behind this all, they haven't given up. And it's just continuing this step-by-step move into some kind of very controlled society. So, I mean, the next thing on the agenda is the climate change hoax, one has to say, which is being used just to kind of get control over people. And again, they're using similar tactics like during COVID. They frighten people into believing there's some kind of urgency. And then they also try to tempt people to act as, to do good, to do the right thing. It's the same with the vaccine. If you take the vaccine, you're doing the good thing, you're doing it for others, you're doing the right thing. And same with the climate change agenda. If you give up your diesel or petrol car, you're doing the right thing. If you buy an electronic car, you're doing the right thing. If you just give in to all these government restrictions, you're doing the right thing. But people don't understand often that it's not for the good. It's not for the environment. It's not for us. It's not for our freedom. It's just to get more control over people. And if you look even deeper into this agenda, then you see it's all to reduce humanity, to depopulate the world. And I know a few years ago, I wouldn't have dared to say anything like that because I knew that people just think, oh, that's crazy. That can't be. And I didn't even imagine myself that it would be that bad. But it's just when you just look into the full agenda, you just see the main goal is actually depopulation. And it sounds horrible, but it's just a fact. And if we don't face this horrible fact, they, as those who are leading this whole thing, they'll just continue with their plan. But I'm positive. I believe that we, the people, I mean, we are much more in numbers, first of all, that if we just all say no and just stop doing what they say, we are able to resist this thing, although it's already quite far. The plan has gone incredibly far, and we're the society is just sleepwalking into this trap where everything looks good until you're in the trap, and then you notice, oh dear, what are we doing here? Why we're not allowed out of our city, or we're not allowed to buy what we want, or we can't own our own house, or we're not allowed to drive to places where we want to go, and if everything is moving in that direction, but I still believe we can stop it. Yes,
this is a very necessary and encouraging thing to say to people, and I think you're absolutely right in this, that what happened in German society was within the German nation. What we see happening at the moment is clearly happening to a planned global agenda, but that means that we effectively have the whole population of the earth to be waking up and doing a little bit to stop what's happening. I always come back to many hands make light work. And if we had a lot of people doing just a little bit to wake up their fellow man, we would be moving quite quickly. But something is happening, I think. We definitely see many people have changed. They're maybe a little bit anxious, but they are asking questions. And I find this very encouraging because people have got to realize that something is wrong before they ever want to do something about it. So what did you do as the first thing for the White Rose here in UK? Did you set the website up, or did you print something? How did you actually kickstart it?
Yeah, well, the first thing was I felt it, first of all. I felt the urgency of trying to tell people that, this is not about a virus. It's not about our health or anything. This is some kind of dark plan. I have to admit, the first 3 weeks when it all started, when they started talking about COVID, or Corona, it was then still called, I wasn't sure what was going on. I thought, well, maybe, it could be, something like the Black Death coming. You never know. It could be all real, and we might have to be careful, and there might be people dropping dead and all that. And but it took me about 3 weeks to notice. It's all hyped up, and I think what helped me realize that it's a hoax or that something's completely going wrong was when I read there was a Swiss website. I think it used to be called a Swiss propaganda, something like that, but they changed the name later to Swiss Politics or something. And they wrote that there were not more people dying than during the flu, that Italy, actually, North Italy usually has a problem with lung illnesses, lung conditions. And all of that was kind of just used to make it look as if there's some kind of deadly virus, some kind of big urgency. When I saw the fact that there's not more people dying than during a usual flu season, I just thought, okay, well, there's no reason to be afraid. There's nothing to be afraid of. So if there's nothing to be afraid of, why are they coming up with more and more restrictions? And that's when I felt I need to write a newsletter. With the original White Rose in mind, using the same tactics, just giving it to people, trying to touch people in their heart, trying to reach them privately, just giving them a leaflet to read on their own. I wouldn't do a big thing out of it. And then I think it was a few months later, actually, we set up I needed help for the website and all that, and we were a few people who set up the website, and where we put out articles, and we made a newsletter, and then people just started to subscribe to the newsletter, and just more and more coming. I never imagined that would ever happen. I just thought we'll have a website there for people to come back if they have the leaflet, so they could kind of come back to the website and look up maybe more information. But there was just more and more people subscribing to the newsletter. And we, when I say we, it was me and a few other people. We continued distributing the leaflets. So we started off at a protest in London, but we continued doing it at home where we lived. We went along the streets. We put them through people's doors. Usually we tried not to be seen, because at that time it was, as I said before, it was quite scary, because if you said anything against the narrative, they could have maybe called the police or have you arrested. We've seen things happening like that. So we tried to remain discreet, and we just distributed hundreds and hundreds of leaflets by hand. Then we had other people who wanted to carry on, wanted to help distributing leaflets as well. And I think it's the leaflet thing. That's how it all started off. And that's just how the White Rose in Germany did their resistance. So they give out leaflets. Of course, at that time, there was no internet. They had no access to any other media. So they had to use their own writing skills. I think they they probably worked at night, hidden in their cellars, and typed on their typewriter and printed it with their own printing machine, and everything had to be done very secretly and very cautiously. But they felt this urgency to wake people up and to do something against this evil regime. And I think the admirable thing is that they went so far to risk their life, and in the end they did die for what they believed in.
Yes, they were amazingly brave, and they paid the ultimate price for it. But I'm going to say to you, Rosie, that you said very early on that you found it, I'm going to use the word challenging, a bit scary, during the oppression of lockdown to start to do what you did. And you've just mentioned, that all you were doing was putting out leaflets. But at that stage in the UK, there was already this horrible oppression that, you could go and visit a relative and that might result in the police turning up at your door. So what I want to say to you is that even at that time in UK, what was happening was pretty nasty, and it took some courage for you and the other people that joined you to do what you were doing in handing out those leaflets. So I am delighted that you're speaking to me today under my Gutsy Woman series, because what you did took some guts. There's no question of it.
It's funny that sometimes when I remember two of my older daughters who they went together on their own, distributed leaflets, and they told me that somebody came running after them angrily when they noticed they had this leaflet put through the door. They probably wanted to react, and they opened the door and run after them and said they should take this silly leaflet. But on the other hand, they had somebody who ran after them and said, "Oh, I'm so glad you gave me this leaflet because I thought I was all on my own." And so there were both reactions. I remember myself, people getting angry from seeing the leaflets, and it was, I think, quite often people from the resistance would experience that anger from people as soon as you confronted them with what we believed is the truth. And when you tried to wake them up, they got angry. So it's not like they would say, "Oh, I'll have a look at it and I'll maybe think about it." They often just had an angry reaction. And it was, again, you could remind yourself of the Nazis, or not the Nazis, but the people themselves. For example, the ones who then betrayed, or that it was a housekeeper who betrayed the sister and brother Scholl. When he found the leaflets being lying around in the uni, I think that was the last time when they distributed leaflets. It was in Munich in the university, and he picked them up, and he didn't hide it away and keep it and think about it. He got angry and then reported them to the police. And even though, again, the brutality was much more visible there, but people from the resistance during COVID, during the lockdowns, we experienced similar things, that people will get angry and then report you to the police and things like that for telling the truth, or for not wearing a mask, or going in a shop without a mask. It was when we think back now, it was just so crazy at that time. You couldn't enter a shop without being afraid of being reported for not wearing a mask. I think that was from September 2020 or something like that. It became mandatory to wear a mask in shops. That's when I stopped going to shops, because I thought, I'm not going to wear a mask, so I'm just going to have to order my food online. And if I do go to a shop, I'm just going to have to walk in and be challenged. Yeah, be challenged. Yeah.
Yes, and you had the anger which came out in people, which is similar to Nazi Germany, because people got angry with anybody who dared to say that the Nazi regime was wrong or Hitler was wrong or any criticism of the government. But the other thing that was encouraged were people were encouraged to spy on each other and tell on each other. And that was also a key thing that was happening here in UK under lockdown. And then we've seen these terrible minutes of the Spy B meeting that took place. Sorry, that's my dog's ears. If you can hear that flapping noise, that's my dog shaking herself. Yeah, we had the terrible Spy B minutes, which revealed that the government was using applied psychology through this specialist team to make people more fearful of the COVID-19 threat and to make them more compliant with social distancing and lockdown. So we have the anger between people, and we also have people being encouraged to spy and report on each other if they weren't adhering to the government's so-called advice. And then this was all sitting on a foundation of fear that they've created. And these are absolutely attributes of what it was like to live in Nazi Germany. They might have a little bit of a veneer, I'll say respectable in inverted commas, respectable veneer because it's here in UK, but it was exactly the same features.
Yeah.
And that can't be accidental, can it?
No, there's so many parallels. Also, when I just recently reread the newsletters, the leaflets from the White Rose in Germany, and I just discovered so many parallels, and it's not over. It wasn't just in 2020, it's still continuing. I just remember where they cited, I think it's some kind of Greek philosopher, and he already then knew that you need to make the people poor, and you need to make so that they work all the time, and their mind is then busy with having to get their daily food, and so there will be no uprising against the regime and things like that. Very interesting parallels.
Yes, absolutely. Just sticking on what you did. So you started out purely with leafletting, and again, there's absolute similarities with the UK column because we initially started by putting out one A4 sheet printed on both sides. That was the original piece of information. It didn't actually come from the UK column because we called ourselves the Devonport column at that time, which was an area within Plymouth. But it was an A4 sheet. We printed 500 of them, and these went out, and nothing happened. And then a month later, we put out another 500, and then something interesting happened because we started to get one or two people contacting us usually by email. And they said, "Oh, you're talking about all these strange things going on in Plymouth. Do you know this and do you know that?" And they began to feed us with information. And encouraged by this, we took a bold step and we went from an A4 sheet to an A3 sheet folded in half, and that gave us 4 pages instead of 2. And that was the start of our written paper growing, and eventually we had enough support. We were doing meetings as well, so we would do talks and meetings where we would try and raise money. And eventually we had a small number of people. Most of them were retired, but they were very concerned about what was happening in the country, and they started to donate to us. And also a local man, lovely local man, who said, "I think you need an office." And he paid for us to have this little office for 6 months. We got a second-hand table and chairs, and somebody lent us a computer, and then we got a phone installed. And one of the ladies who came on board to help, a lovely grandmum called Carol Bragg, I remember her sitting looking at the telephone, and she said, "I wish that B telephone would ring," but it didn't. And then a month later, Carol was looking at the telephone and saying, "I wish that phone had stopped ringing." And it was absolutely amazing, the connectivity that came into us from our start, just as you, of printing what was essentially a leaflet, an A4 leaflet. So it shows, doesn't it, that in this age of the internet and websites and everything, that putting a piece of paper out on the streets is still a very powerful thing to do.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's personal if you get a leaflet and it's just a bit calmer to sit down and to read it rather than sit on the internet and there's just an overload of information coming in all the time. So there's maybe a chance to reach people, when they have time to think. And that's why we then, we continued with the website, and we're still continuing with the website. And there's a lot of information that was being sent to us, and some of it we publish. But there was, at a point, we thought it might be good to have a printed magazine as well, just to have something what can stay, what can last. Because it might sound a bit hysterical, but we never know if the internet is going to go off, or whatever, power cuts, and then everything could be lost, or a lot of that what we kind of want people to see and read. But if we have a printed magazine, there's at least something what stays, what people can have on their bookshelf, or pass on to other people. So we've we started with the Freedom magazine this April. Actually, it's the first issues. It's come out in April. Yeah.
Of course, you sent a copy to me, and I'm going to say thank you very much for doing that, because that's then prompted this conversation.
Yeah. Welcome.
And you've got articles up on the website. So I'm just having a look as we're talking. So you've got one, "Let's Bring Cash Back to Life." You've got a free download book, which is "Stop Them Together. We Will End World Control, and This Is How." And that's got 81 authors in it, which is really impressive. You've got some very nice white rose badges. And then you've got a book here, which is "How to Avoid Digital Slavery, Stories and Advice from 40 Authors." We've got one with a wolf surrounded by some pretty vulnerable chickens and hens and a cockerel. And that says "The Big Bad Wolf and the Syringe." And the last one, I think, that's down, oh no, there's two actually. There's "Hope Amidst a Tsunami of Evil, Exposing the Great Lies." And there's "The White Rose, Defending Freedom." So, Rosie, you've got a lovely selection of material, and it's quite clear that some pretty capable writers have got on board with what you're trying to do.
Yeah. So most of the books what we offer to our readers, they're written by, we could call them members of the White Rose. There's a lot of people who just like writing, and I think a lot of them are probably a bit middle-aged or elderly people, so they still have this time and maybe ability to write. And it's a lot of it is just made from work together. So they've been writing their essays, and we then put it together in a book, and that's what we offer to people to read, and hopefully it will help to wake up people, or at least, what is also important, to strengthen those who are awake but maybe kind of are swimming against the tide.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, well, this is really excellent, because the important thing is you did what you did, and it is growing. There's no question of that. And I really like the way that you are saying become a member with us and join the White Rose family, which is a very nice way of putting it. And the other key bit, which you highlight, and it's connected back to the Skoll siblings themselves, is that they had a Christian faith, and this was a very important thing to them. But you'd highlighted on the website that there was a Christian background to the Skoll siblings, and this was a very important thing to them. And you've certainly emphasised this on the website. And I see that on your top bar, you've also got a button to press, which is pray. So tell me about the spiritual side.
Yes, so I believe that the sisters Sophie and Hans Scholl, they wouldn't have had such a strong drive to do what they did if it wouldn't have been for the faith, the Christian faith. And it wasn't just them, also their friends. I think there was Christoph and Alexander. Now, they weren't necessarily a Christian from the start, or living a faithful life. The Sophie and Hans were actually in the Hitlerjugend, so that's the youth group, what Hitler, the youth, what was brought up to become Nazis. They used to be in the Hitler Jugend when they were younger, and they were quite opposed to their own parents, and their parents were Christians. But over the years, they then realized that the Nazi teaching is completely wrong and twisted, and they then focused more on the faith, on their original faith. And also, I believe they grew up as Protestant church, but they were quite influenced by a bishop called von Galen, who was also a very brave, outspoken person who resisted the regime by preaching. So he would preach in church against the Nazis, and of course that put his life at risk as well. They were influenced by his writing, but also by Cardinal Henry Newman, which is an English cardinal who is now canonized, and he used to be an Anglican man. He grew up an Anglican, and then I think he converted it when he was grown up to the Catholic Church and became later Cardinal Henry Newman. And they've been inspired by his writings, and even in their leaflets they do mention the spiritual side. So I can't remember the words exactly, but it's pretty clear. We have it in the White Rose book, by the way, the one where it says Defending Freedom. We have their original leaflets translated and printed there. So they did mention the spiritual side of this, and they said that things like, the German population or German people have to turn back to the Christian faith in order to fight back against this evil, which they were completely aware of comes from the devil, or they might have even named it that way. And they were absolutely clear about Hitler serving some evil powers, and that's only with the Christian faith, and only with the truth in the Christian faith could this whole thing be turned around. Yeah.
Yes, and I certainly support the view. It's been very clear to me for quite a few years now that we're actually very much in a spiritual battle, and it's important to recognise this, and it's important to understand that means that fighting what is happening has to be done in a spiritual way, as well as using all the wherewithal that we have on earth. This is, for me, very clearly a spiritual thing, and I don't know whether I'm alone, but in feeling this, but sometimes when you're actually challenging some of this system, you can almost feel that there's a very dark and oppressive spiritual side pushing back at you.
Yeah, I think when you see the whole picture and you understand that that it's more than just, it's more than just politics or society issues. It's spiritual, and it's interesting that a lot of people come out and say that now, because I think before the COVID era, people wouldn't maybe dare as much, and now, since we've been so challenged with all these agendas and these, what's been happening in the past years, I think people dare to speak out more and dare to go back to where does this all originate from at all.
Yes.
So it's also bringing some good in that sense, that we kind of think back and kind of contemplate what is life all about, and what shall we decide for? Do we decide for the good, or are we on the side of the good or on the side of the evil? If we're on the side of the good, we have to stand up and kind of just speak up and admit that it is a spiritual thing. There is God exists, and also demons exist, and at one point we're all going to be judged for how we were, or what we did, or so we can't hide away the fact that there's more than just what we see on earth.
Yes, and I think we get a clue to the importance of this by the fact that here in the wonderful democracy, the liberal democracy called UK, we're increasingly seeing laws which are designed to stop people praying. I find this very significant, because I ask myself the question, why are they so frightened of people praying? Yeah,
that's another thing, isn't it? That when they try to restrict people praying in front of abortion clinics, they may be very peaceful people, not even speaking to anyone, but just standing there and praying. And there's stories that people were getting arrested just for praying. So that shows that something is completely wrong in that sense. Yeah.
Yes. So how do you see the White Rose growing? Are you now established in the way that you'd like to be? You've got the website, you're publishing material. Have you got any other plans, or is this now the White Rose Resistance, and you're going to grow it from here?
Well, the funny thing is, I always thought, when the lockdowns are over, we're done with this. This is only for during lockdowns, but it just continued. And as I mentioned at the start, there's just always more to discover, and people keep sending more information. And when you then see the greater picture and the climate change agenda, or Agenda 2030, and when you see all of that, you just see there's no end really until the whole system maybe gets toppled over. I don't think we have any concrete plans. I think we're just I always thought, maybe we can just stop it when everything's calmed down, but at the moment I think we're just continuing how it is. So we've set up the magazine, and that's something we hope people will subscribe to. And who knows? I mean, if it would be lovely if the website wouldn't be necessary anymore. We'll just continue what we've done until now, as long as there's the need for the resistance. We'll just carry on resisting, and it would be lovely if the website wouldn't be necessary anymore, if the White Rose resistant group would be kind of surplus, if things would turn out in a way that humanity is just free from all these dictatorships and all these dystopian plans, then that would be lovely. But as long as there's there's things to fight against, we'll just continue with this work, what we've done.
Yeah, brilliant.
So
Well,
far.
Rosie, I mean, what a wonderful place. I think, that's a lovely place to end, because here you are in 2024 saying that you started your resistance with a lot of impetus from what the Skoll family did in Nazi Germany, and they ended their resistance because they couldn't fight anymore because they were executed. But their material said the resistance will continue. And here you are in UK in 2024, and you've also ended by saying the resistance will continue, which is exactly right. I think this is a wonderful place to be. And I'd like to thank you for joining me, and I certainly thank you for, you've used the word dare quite a lot, but I know that during lockdown it took a lot of guts to actually get out there and be amongst the public and challenge the system. So I'm going to say you are a gutsy woman, and you've mentioned your daughters who were brave enough to do it as well. So that's really fantastic. Should we end perhaps by two things? One is, we'll have it in the notes under this this audio clip, but your website is an easy one to remember because it's the whiterose.uk. So that's one. And the other thing I'd like to draw people's attention to is that if you go and search YouTube, there's quite a lot of information about the Skoll family and the White Rose, but there's a particular film, and it's called Sophie Skoll, the final days. And that's 1 hour 55, and I've watched it. It's very, very poignant. But there's also some very good little documentaries that have been done at other times, some of them in UK and they're in English, and some of them that have been translated from Germany. But I'm going to say to the audience, if you're really not aware of what these amazing young people did in Nazi Germany, go and have a look at those. And of course, go and have a look at their legacy, which is, as we've heard in the last hour, is the White Rose in UK. So, Rosie, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to me. You've got the UK column audience listening to you. Is there anything you'd like to say to them or ask them to do?
Well, first of all, thank you very much as well for giving this opportunity to speak. Well, I admire the UK column, and I guess the people who watch and listen to UK column are pretty much the same people, or have the same convictions. They're convinced of the same things, like people at the White Rose who are members of the White Rose. So I think together we just have to continue our resistance and continue speaking out and doing what our conscience says is the right thing.
I think that's absolutely right. We're going to continue the resistance until we get to that happy day when the bad guys have been put in their box and we can do nicer things.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Rosie, thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been great.